the terrifying way one girl discovered a home intruder. To hear more stories like this one, be sure to like this video, and subscribe to Story Blend. To be the first to hear these stories, click the notification bell, and we'll let you know the moment we have a new story to tell. I begged my mother to let me stay home alone. The year was 2007, shortly after Jessica's 15th birthday. Her mom was out of town for a few days on a business trip, and Jessica was alone in a small house in a neighborhood on the sketchier end of decent, and that fact combined with her mother's paranoia about Jessica being home alone longer than 4 or 5 hours at a time meant that she had to stay over at a friend's house while her mom was gone. This friend's house was across the street and over one house from my own, Jessica wrote. The place my mom was going was only about 2 hours away, and having just turned 15, I was determined to be seen as a mature young woman, instead of the baby I felt I was being treated like. So for the week leading up to her mother's trip, Jessica was moaning and groaning about being old enough to take care of myself and insisting that she could just check in with her friend's parents every now and then instead. But, in truth, my house was creepy at night, even when my mom was at home with me, Jessica explained. I'd found out the day my mum was scheduled to leave that my friend had somehow gotten her hands on a PlayStation 3, so it didn't take me too long to stop complaining about how I didn't need a babysitter and just agree to stay at my friend's house after all. We were just bored teenagers. At around 11 on the last night of her mother's trip, Jessica and her friend ended up back in my friend's room messing around with a brand new flip phone Jessica got for her birthday. Her parents had gone out hours earlier after buying the girls a pizza for dinner and weren't going to be back for at least an hour. They had gotten bored with the PlayStation 3 game that they had been playing for days. It was too late to call any of our friends, but I knew my mom was coming home the next morning at some ungodly hour, and I knew that she had this thing about our answering machine. No matter how tired she was, no matter where she'd gotten back from, if there were any messages on the answering machine she listened to all of them, Jessica remembered. Being the bored 15-year-olds we were, my friend and I decided to leave a message or two for my mom to find in the morning. They called Jessica's home phone and put it on speaker, cracking up and trying to figure out what our message was going to be about. It normally took 5 rings for a call to go to the machine, but on the 3rd ring the phone picks up and they heard. Hello? I'd never heard this voice in my life. The voice sounded like it belonged to some 60-year-old guy who'd been smoking for the last 40 years of his life, but even past that there was this menacing quality to his tone, Jessica wrote. I can't describe it exactly, but it sounded cold and dangerous, the sort of voice where if you heard it on the street you'd want to get away from that person immediately. Jessica looked at her friend. Her eyes were huge and her face was pale. Neither of them could get it together to say anything in response. Hello? The voice said again. There was a pause and Jessica tried to squeak out something along the lines of, who are you and why are you in my house? But then he said in a low voice, you shouldn't have called. There was some sort of slam and the call disconnected. Jessica immediately dropped the phone and proceeded to freak out. The friend asked if Jessica knew who that was, but Jessica had never heard that voice before. Of course I didn't know the creepy guy answering my phone at 11 at night when my house was supposed to be empty, Jessica wrote. We checked the call log to see if we'd accidentally called the wrong number. Nope. Right number. Jessica and her friend were so shaken up that they couldn't immediately figure out who they should call or what they should do. If they should call the cops or call her mom or call her friend's parents or run around making sure all the doors and windows were locked or what. They ended up sprinting around her friend's house, double-checking every lock they could check while gasping at what had just happened to her friend's parents over the phone. They waited for her friend's parents to come home. Jessica's friend's parents were about 15 minutes away and said they'd call 911, and her mother told the girls to stay in her friend's room with the door locked and all the lights on in case this guy was going from house to house. And so for 10 minutes, They were huddled in the far corner of the room, jumping every time the house settled or one of their legs scraped on the carpet. The cops got to Jessica's house not too long after her friend's parents got home. To be honest, I don't remember a lot of the specifics about what the cops were doing, mainly because I refused to set foot outside of my friend's house, Jessica wrote. But I remember that they asked my friend and me a lot of questions. We couldn't give them a lot of information, unfortunately. We had called from my friend's room, which was in the back of her house away from where we would have been able to see my house, and the dude with the creepy smoker's voice isn't a very helpful description to go off of when looking for someone. One question they asked stood out to Jessica, though, because she remembers thinking it was weird for them to ask who had keys to get into the house. I told them only my mum and I had keys. The police had a lot of questions. Jessica later found out that the reason the police asked about keys to the house was that there were no signs of forced entry anywhere around the exterior and that the front door was wide open when they got there. There wasn't anything messed up and nothing was taken, but the wall-mounted corded phone was off the hook and the phone base itself was cracked like it had been smashed. Both her mom's room and Jessica's room had some stuff moved around and displaced like someone was going through their drawers. My mom got called at some point during all of this and managed to get home that night, very tired and very freaked out about what had happened, Jessica wrote. The cops investigated the incident but never came up with any answers. We weren't doing too well financially at that point, but we still managed to move across town within a few months of this happening. For the months between that night and the day they moved, though, Jessica barely slept and had bad nightmares. She refused to be alone in the house, even for a couple of minutes, and started getting obsessive about checking and double-checking the locks, a habit which has stuck around since this incident. Here's the part that really freaks me out. There's one last detail that Jessica considered relevant to the story. I didn't say anything at the time because I was worried someone might have tried to blame me for everything that had happened, Jessica admitted. It's extremely eerie and I still don't know how to explain it. Earlier that day, I'd gone back over to my house to get a notebook of mine full of writing that I wanted to show my friend. There was nothing wrong with the house as far as I could tell. The front door was locked when I got to it, no signs of any tampering or any weirdness at the entrance. No specific noises from any part of the house, but the minute I stepped inside something just felt off. Really off. It was quiet. I was getting chills up and down my spine, and I had goosebumps all over. I tried to will myself to just get over it, to go back to my room to get the notebook, but I couldn't make myself take more than a few steps into the house. I was too creeped out. I locked the door and ran back across the street. When Jessica got back to her friend's house, she felt like an idiot and questioned herself as to why she was such a wimp that she couldn't walk through her own house when it was empty. But looking back, I've gone over it in my mind 1,000 times. I've wondered if maybe I left the door open when I left, but there's no way. I distinctly remember locking the deadbolt and looking over my shoulders the whole time because I had that burning, crawling feeling on the back of my neck you get when you feel like you're being watched, Jessica wrote. And after the creepy call, Jessica checked to make sure her keys were in her backpack. Nobody's come up with a good answer in a decade. No one even knows how he got inside in the first place without having a key and without forcing or breaking something open. We never got an explanation. The whole thing is an unsolved mystery to this day. The police never came to any conclusion, and Jessica and her mom have no idea why that guy was in their house or what he intended on doing. Jessica thinks that there was another way into the house that she never knew about, and that the police couldn't find that this guy somehow figured out. I was so glad when we moved away, Jessica wrote. I will say that to this day, the first night in our new house was probably the best night of sleep I've ever gotten. In any case, Jessica still wants to know what happened that night, but she thinks it would be strange to go back and ask the current owners if she could randomly poke around their house or its foundation. Either way, I can't go back to that neighborhood without getting the chills, so it'll probably have to remain a mystery, Jessica concluded. Thank you for listening. Let us know what you thought of this story in the comments below, and if you want to hear more stories like this one, like this video and subscribe to Story Blend.